History is about to repeat itself, and Poland is in the crosshairs. For centuries, the country has walked a fragile tightrope between East and West, and now that rope is fraying. With NATO and Russia locked in a dangerous standoff, Poland again faces the threat of becoming a battlefield. Could this be the first NATO nation to fall? And what happens to the rest of Europe? On today's episode of the Infographic Show, we're showing how Poland will get dragged into Russia's war. Decades after the Nazi invasion, Poland once again finds itself on the front lines of war. But this time the enemy is Russia. Western leaders warn that the war in Ukraine may only be the beginning, with Poland as the next flashpoint. Its 258-mile border with Belarus, one of Moscow's closest allies, places the country squarely in the line for Russia's next special military operation. Russia and Belarus created a union state back in 1997, a deal that focuses on defense and security. This includes arrangements like the Joint Air Defense System and the integration of Russian and Belarusian military operations. One of Poland's biggest fears is that Russia has stationed nuclear weapons right next door in Belarus. They remain under Russia's control, and warheads can be launched on nuclear-capable Iskander missiles or Su-30 fighter jets, with a range of about 300 miles. Huge stretches of eastern and central Poland are directly in the firing line. Reports also suggest that Russia has sent the first Oreshnik missile system to Belarus, with Minsk producing the launcher itself. Many Western analysts remain skeptical of the capabilities, but this system is touted as the next big thing to nuclear weapons. It's rumored to travel at over 7,600 miles per hour and can carry 6 munitions, each containing 6 warheads, and all of those could hit the same target simultaneously. The Oreshnik can also carry conventional or nuclear warheads, and the temperature on the warhead matches the temperature of the sun. At least that's what the Russian President Vladimir Putin claimed in February. But whether the Oreshnik's reputation is deserved, the fact remains Russia has some serious firepower just across Poland's border in Belarus. But that is not the only worry. Poland also shares a 130-mile border with Russia itself through the heavily militarized Baltic enclave of Kaliningrad. Seized from Germany after World War II, the enclave is separated from mainland Russia. Instead, it's surrounded by NATO, Lithuania to the north and east, Poland to the south, and the Baltic Sea to the west. The sea is often called NATO's lake, since apart from Kaliningrad, it's almost completely ringed by alliance members: Denmark, Germany, Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Finland, and Sweden. Kaliningrad is considered one of the most heavily fortified regions on the planet. It houses Russia's Baltic fleet, including nuclear-capable submarines, and it's believed to host as many as 150 launchers for Iskander missiles. The enclave is also packed with advanced air defense systems and around 15,000 troops. If a large-scale clash between Russia and NATO ever erupts, this strip of land between Kaliningrad and Belarus, the Suwałki Gap, would become one of the most important battlegrounds in Europe. The 64-mile corridor runs along the Polish-Lithuanian border, but it's only 40 miles wide at its shortest point. On the Polish side of the border, the area is made up of farmland, forests, and scattered lakes. It's terrain that complicates large-scale military maneuvers. Only 2 main roads and a single railway cut through the narrow strip, turning the Suwałki Gap into a natural choke point, one that a determined enemy could cut off with ease. If Russia seized the Suwałki Gap, it would effectively cut off NATO's ability to form a land bridge with Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, and it would seriously complicate the group's ability to defend Finland to the north. But if NATO held the corridor, the tables would turn. Kaliningrad would be cut off, stripping Russia of its ability to isolate the Baltic states or push deeper into NATO territory. And that's why Russia has been beefing up both defensive and offensive firepower in Kaliningrad and across the Belarusian border. At the same time, NATO, and Poland most of all, have been increasing their own presence. Since 2016, NATO has stationed 4 multinational battle groups in Poland and the Baltic states. It's also doubled troop levels across 8 eastern flank countries and poured in air and naval assets to strengthen the region against any potential strike. In any future conflict here, the farmland and muddy soil will seriously hamper the movement of armored units. Meanwhile, the dense forests and water barriers lend themselves to smaller, more agile forces. Analysts say the best way to defend the gap is with a layered strategy called defense in depth. That means stacking fortifications and air defenses, backed by special operations units, long-range missiles, and swarms of attack drones, all meant to grind down an assault before it can ever break through. So, the threat to Poland's territory in this area is all too real. The threat is underscored by large-scale, highly provocative Russian-Belarusian war games in western Belarus, known as Zapad or West. The Zapad exercises date back to 1977 in the Soviet era. They're meant to happen every 4 years, though between 1984 and 2009, only one was actually held. That was in 1999. The most recent, in 2021, was on an entirely different scale. Around 200,000 Russian and Belarusian troops, backed by 760 pieces of equipment and 15 naval vessels, all drilling just across NATO's eastern border. Less than 4 months later, from February 10th to 20th, 2022, Russia and Belarus held another round of drills in Belarus called Union Resolve. This time the focus was on both air and ground operations. Russia brought some of its most advanced hardware, S-400 and Pantsir S-1 air defense systems, Su-35 jets, and nuclear-capable Iskander missiles. Russian and Belarusian officials claimed that the exercises were purely defensive and that Russian forces would withdraw after the drills ended. And a few days later, they did leave Belarus, but they didn't go back to Russia. Instead, those troops and weapons formed the first wave of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. A Zapad exercise scheduled for 2023 was cancelled because of the ongoing war, but 2 years later, Zapad 2025 went ahead, running from September 12th to 16th, 2025. The exercises took place on multiple bases across Belarus, mainland Russia, Kaliningrad, and the Baltic and Barents Seas. Belarus initially claimed around 13,000 troops would take part, later revising that down to just 7,000 or 8,000. But analysts pointed out that, as in previous Zapad drills, the real numbers were likely far higher. In fact, Russia's own newspaper, Izvestia, reported that as many as 100,000 personnel and 10,000 pieces of equipment were involved. The maneuvers were said to center around repelling outside aggression, with drills that included the Oreshnik missile system, long-range bombers, and even a launch of the so-called hypersonic Kinzhal, or dagger missile at a naval target. According to Izvestia, the exercises were framed as defensive. The first stage simulated an attack on the Union state and a combined response. The second stage focused on restoring territorial control and driving NATO forces out. To highlight the supposedly defensive and open nature of the drills, Belarus and Russia invited a host of other militaries to take part. Troops from Bangladesh, India, Iran, Burkina Faso, Congo, and Mali joined in the maneuvers, while observers from more than 24 countries, including NATO members Turkey, Hungary, and even the United States, were on hand to watch. But given what happened in the wake of the last Zapad drills, NATO and especially Poland braced for the worst and began to respond. In the run-up to the drills, many Western analysts worried they could be used as cover to escalate the war in and around Ukraine. The exercises were widely viewed as not just muscle flexing, but a rehearsal for something far more serious, a blockade or even an invasion, with the Suwałki Gap seen as a likely target. Just 3 days before the event began on September 9th, the Polish Prime Minister, Donald Tusk, announced that Poland would close its borders with Belarus at midnight on September 11th. He cited national security concerns over Russia's aggressive military tactics right on their border. Polish Interior Minister Marcin Kierwiński said the border would remain closed indefinitely. It would only reopen when the government was sure that there was no longer a threat to Polish citizens. 2 weeks later, the border crossings at Terespol and Kukierki resumed operations. NATO and neighboring countries like Lithuania also strengthened their border security in the lead-up to the exercises. Lithuania closed its airspace along its Belarusian border. Latvia followed suit, closing off the airspace along its Belarusian and Russian borders. On September 10th, Poland closed off airspace near the Belarusian border. Officially, it was tied to Zapad 2025, but that wasn't the whole story. More on that later. While the Zapad exercises were taking place, NATO also flexed its muscles, conducting military drills of its own in the region. Lithuania held exercises with more than 17,000 troops, while Latvia mobilized over 12,000. Poland went bigger still, conducting drills near the Belarusian border with more than 30,000 personnel. At the same time, NATO's Joint Expeditionary Force carried out large-scale maneuvers in the Baltic Sea. With tensions already high and so many troops and advanced weapons packed into the same region, a single mistake could have sparked a disaster. And then on the eve of exercises on both sides of the new Iron Curtain, Poland was hit by something even more alarming: a swarm of Russian drones crossing over from Ukraine. On the night of September 9th, between 19 and 23 Russian drones entered Polish airspace. It took place during one of Russia's large-scale aerial bombardments of Ukraine. This raid was one of the largest yet, involving more than 400 drones and dozens of missiles. All of the drones that crossed in from the Ukrainian airspace turned out to be unarmed, used mainly for reconnaissance rather than attack. But Poland and NATO had no way of knowing that, and they reacted. Polish F-16s and Dutch F-35s were scrambled to intercept, and the jets managed to shoot down at least 3 of the drones. This was the first time Poland or any NATO country had engaged and destroyed Russian assets in its airspace since the invasion of Ukraine began in 2022. German Patriot missile batteries stationed in Poland were also placed on high alert, though they were never fired. The remaining drones eventually crashed after running out of fuel or power, damaging a few buildings but causing no casualties. Even so, the incursion forced several Polish airports to shut down temporarily, including a key logistics hub for aid to Ukraine. In the aftermath, Poland, NATO, and pretty much all of the West accused Russia of deliberate provocation. Before the incursion took place, Belarus reportedly informed Poland and Lithuania about drones being out of control due to electronic jamming. Russia, for its part, not only denies that the incursion was deliberate, but insists that it wasn't responsible for the incursion at all. At a UN special session, Russia's representative argued the drones couldn't have come from Russian territory. Their maximum range was about 430 miles, too short to reach Poland through Ukraine, which is around 600 miles away. He also pointed out that no long-range drones had been recovered. He very kindly offered professional discussions with Poland's defense ministry to clear things up. Warsaw rejected the offer. On the Russian side of the internet, speculation is rife that the drones were launched by Ukraine, a false flag operation to increase tensions between NATO and Russia, dragging NATO directly into the conflict. It's hard to know what Russia hoped to gain from the incursion. Some analysts believe it was a test to see NATO's readiness to counter drones, and with around a quarter of them shot down, Moscow may have found the results encouraging. But whatever the reason, the effect was clear. Tensions between Russia and NATO, especially Poland, spiked even higher, with alliance members sending fresh military support into Poland and along NATO's eastern flank. That is certainly not to Russia's benefit. France, the UK, and Norway have sent or are sending additional high-end fighter jets to help defend Polish airspace. The Netherlands has supplied Patriot NASAM systems and counter-drone equipment, as well as 300 soldiers. The Czech Republic has sent a special operations team consisting of 3 helicopters and around 100 soldiers. And Ukraine has sent a team of drone specialists to train Polish forces in anti-drone operations. And let's be honest, they had the practice. NATO also announced an operation to protect the alliance's eastern borders called Eastern Sentry. This involved military forces from Denmark, France, the UK, Germany, and others. All of this firepower flowing into Poland just highlights an old truth. Geography has always put Poland in the firing line. For centuries, the country has been an open highway for invading armies. The European plain stretches flat from France to Russia, and Poland sits right in the middle. To move west, you march through Poland. To strike east, you march through Poland. History shows that Germanic troops poured through its lands. And then came the Huns, Avars, Magyars, and Vikings. And by the 1200s, Mongols left towns in ashes, while the Teutonic Knights cut swaths of destruction across villages. Wave after wave, empire after empire, Poland was crushed. And yet, somehow, it survived. By the 10th century, Poland had adopted Christianity, courtesy of Duke Mieszko I, pulling it further to the west. But the east was never far away. For nearly 250 years, Poland and Lithuania ruled together in a huge commonwealth that stretched into Ukraine and Belarus. Then in 1795, it all collapsed. Russia, Prussia, and Austria carved it up, and Poland disappeared from the map for over a century. After World War I, Poland was reborn as the Second Republic, sandwiched between Germany and the Soviet Union. Borders shifted again with the Curzon Line, slicing away chunks of territory, but it didn't matter. In 1939, both Hitler and Stalin invaded. Poland was erased from the map once again, split between two monsters. When the war ended, the Soviets refused to return Poland's land. To compensate, the Allies handed it former German territory to the west. Millions were expelled in one of the largest forced migrations in history. 8 million Germans driven out, up to 2 million Poles uprooted from the east. But the new Poland that emerged had some advantages: compact borders easier to defend, access to the sea, and for the first time, an almost entirely Polish population. But Poland still wasn't free. The USSR chained Poland into the Warsaw Pact, making it a Soviet puppet until 1989. Only after the Soviet collapse did Poland finally turn west for good, joining NATO in 1999 and the EU in 2004. For the first time in centuries, Poland was choosing its alliances instead of having them forced upon it. And now Russia threatens once again. Poland has vowed it will never be caught unprepared. The country is raising a 500,000-strong force, spending more on defense than any NATO member relative to its size, and it's building the East Shield. This 435-mile fortress is lined with bunkers, tank traps, and surveillance towers, sealing its border with Belarus and Kaliningrad. The bottom line is that Poland is no longer just a supporter of Ukraine in its war against Russia. It is a frontline state, whether it likes it or not. The drone incursions and the massive military buildup on both sides of its borders have pushed Poland closer to war than at any time since World War II. The pressure is extremely high and the political situation is just as volatile. Any further provocations, whether intentional or accidental, could force its hand, plunging the nation into war with Russia. In the immediate aftermath of the drone incursion, Ukraine invoked NATO's Article 4, triggering mandatory discussions on what actions to take next. That resulted in the major NATO military buildup in and around Poland. On the one hand, these actions bolster Poland's security, but on the other hand, they increase the likelihood of war on Polish soil. If it were ever confirmed that Russia had attacked Poland, NATO's Article 5 would almost certainly be invoked, pulling the entire alliance into Poland's defense. But while that is the treaty, it's unlikely the Polish people would welcome a major war on its own soil unless it came after a clear, unprovoked Russian assault. In September 2025, a survey revealed that 57% of Poles would not volunteer or support the army in the event of war. Only 26% said that they would join or support the military effort, while 17% remain undecided. That dovetails with 2024 research, which found that just under 3/4 of Poles opposed the army or any other NATO country getting involved in the Ukraine conflict. Only 10% were in favor. Poland doesn't want war. Its people don't want to fight Russia, but history shows that Poland rarely gets a choice. And if the past repeats itself, the plains of Poland could once again become a battlefield where the future of Europe is decided. Poland could easily be dragged into Russia's war, but the real nightmare would be a clash with NATO. Watch what would happen if Russia and NATO went to war day by day to see how the conflict could unfold. Or click on this video instead.